Happy STEM Monday and welcome to our third video with Dr. Kelley Lee. In this video, we asked Dr. Lee what we can do to understand and prevent misinformation in science. Stay tuned for part 4 in a few weeks.
How can we understand misinformation and how can we prevent misinformation? I think that is a really big question. And what I can say to that is the way that we used to teach science is it was really just regurgitation of information. You positioned students as empty buckets that needed to be filled. And they contributed very little to that space. And if they did, that teacher was wonderful in thinking through how they wanted students to do that, but it definitely did not happen because of the old science framework, is what I'm saying. So I'm not saying it didn't happen. It's that if it did happen, that teacher is going out of their way because their values are saying that it's important to be able to build these complex critical thinking skills for students. The new framework, however, is very different in that it pushes teachers to really think about how they'll fold in both the process of science and what we call the nature of science. And both of those things, I think, can lean heavily into guiding students to develop complex critical thinking skills. We learn a little bit more about climate change with the data that's being collected every day. And as we learn more, we share about it and we make different recommendations or better recommendations. And I feel like that's the problem when we talk about misconceptions. It's really thinking about how these individuals learned about science and what they really feel is science or engineering. Do they really understand the process that we go through or that experts go through when they make recommendations? Because again, if they understood that we continue to change or modify our recommendations or claims as more evidence is presented, as we learn more about the new thing that's out, then it would make more sense in terms of like why new recommendations are changing over time. And the same goes for, again, something as contentious as climate change. The more we learn about it, and the more we understand how humans are the cause of climate change, and we've identified the problem, we can then identify correct solutions, right? If you fail to identify what the problem actually is, the solutions don't matter because you're not actually creating a solution for the problem at hand. And so when we think about understanding misinformation, it is critical that our science teachers build in many opportunities, not just during a lab, not just during these smaller moments when we engage in that co-construction of knowledge through direct interactive instruction. It's that we have to do this all the time because when they step out of our classrooms, they will be bombarded with claims through media, through all sources of, and paths of information. And we have to give them the skills to be critical about the information they're receiving. And so when we think about developing students as critical, thinkers in a digital world, I think it's important to model that for students. So that way, when you say to a student, is that source credible? Does that student really understand what credibility means? Does that student understand what it means for research to be peer reviewed? I'm not saying drown them in the process of understanding the peer review process, but what I'm saying is at least open up a conversation about critical thinking in an era that I feel is bombarded with a lot of misinformation and now a huge distrust for data and science. And so again, I think just providing a safe space for students to explore that, but also actually watching a teacher check for credibility or check for peer-reviewed sources, or talk with them about why we use certain sources and why we don't for others, what it means to engage in the nature of science. So again, as these things emerge, as new information emerges, that student naturally, when they go out into the real world and they see new claims, they naturally start questioning it. Should I really believe that? Wait, that billboard said this. Is that right? Where can I find more information about this? Or who is actually reporting this information? Let me look more on the author. Do they have any biases that I should be concerned about? Who is funding this research? Is that important to understand? How do I even find information about that? How do I know? The point is they need to start questioning the information that's out there and who's putting it out there. And teachers also need support in being able to do that because these skills are not intuitive. I remember this was when, this is pre-pandemic, and I remember when I was department chair, supporting about 22 teachers in one school, and those are science teachers in one school. I remember I went to my mailbox, and in my mailbox and in every science teacher's mailbox was a book that was super thick but free. I don't even know how it ended there, but it was from the Heartland Institute, and the title of the book was how to prove that climate change is not anthropogenic or human caused, and how it's fake. Like how there was a book of data filled with claims to support teachers in sharing with students why climate change is not a real thing. And I thought to myself, the moment I looked it up, I was like, wait, hold on, who wrote this book? Because as a science teacher, you're immediately moving into skepticism. So I thought, who wrote this book? Heartland Institute. The Heartland Institute sounds like a nice name. And so I thought, let me Google this. And the more I looked it up, the more I realized, okay, they're supported by, other industry and fossil fuel companies and, so on and so forth. And then I started digging in the book, and instead of using it as a resource to teach students about why climate change isn't real, I actually used it to then teach students how to look at information that isn't credible, while using a source that I felt was highly uncredible, because I was able to use my own skill set to trace back the origin of this, who created it, who's funding this information, and then also thinking through as a teacher, how many other teachers went as far as I did in looking at this resource. Because for what I know, everybody in California who's a science teacher received that same book. And if they didn't have the opportunity to even talk to a colleague, or didn't want to talk to a colleague about it because they believe their personal opinion is that climate change is not anthropogenic, then they have very selected, discredited information to now draw from, and then tell students, well, it's a published book, so it must be real. But the point is, I feel like with misinformation, it happens with not only students on a daily basis, but with everybody. And there's a reason for why, the current studies are around 55% of all teachers do not teach about climate change, because they feel that it's not related directly to their subject area, which again, that's to me, that just tells me that there needs to be support in helping teachers to understand how climate science is part of science and should be part of science moving forward, because it's a very real problem that students have to face today and tomorrow, right? That we need solutions for, and that we need to prepare them for. They have the right to learn the science. But then also, when we were thinking through, again, how to support teachers in doing this, I think the statistics are mid 60% is saying that teachers across the nation are teaching climate change, but do so in 1 to 2 hours of the whole year. So for anybody who's at least dug a little bit into climate change and the impacts of climate change, and how overwhelming this issue is, I don't know realistically how you take that on in one class period and then send the message to student that this is urgent, right? That doesn't make sense to me. I only use one period to talk about this climate crisis, and then I move on to whatever else I'm teaching, whether it's, the cell or atomic models and things like that. But that in itself sends messages to students that maybe this isn't as important, because this person is spending zero time on it, or very minimal time on it. And also, you can't even get into the action-oriented pieces with one class period to talk about the issue, and then telling them, yeah, but it's, it's just something you have to learn. I checked it off my list. I fulfilled the framework, and now moving on. The point is, if we're doing this in very meaningful ways, you have to incorporate helping students to combat misinformation against very powerful disinformation campaigns as part of that curriculum, because whether we do so or not, they will be bombarded with these claims. And the best thing we can do is provide a safe space for them to at least explore the claims and give them tools to navigate what that looks like.